Still 30%. Might be 30% for a while. Yeah. Oh, wait, I've lost it. I think that means we've got it? No? I think that means we're live. I think that means we're live. Oh, wait. Yeah. Yes, we, I believe we are live. No. Yes, we are live. No one is watching us, but we are live. I believe we're live. I do. Yeah, that's all we do. Yeah. Sorry, I'm just gonna see if.
That'd be the easy part.
Yeah, I'm just seeing. Am I still getting a weird reverb, echo?
Reverb.
Is it still going there if I take the ears off?
Hi. Grant?
So, Stephen, as we couldn't get you last time, as the gods, my speech has now become dyslexic, as the gods of the live stream would not permit us to hear you, will you begin?
Oh, sorry, I'm accidentally playing the live stream on my phone.
So that's who that one viewer was.
Alright, okay, so, for our apparently 0 viewers, this is a story that I found on ducas.ie. It's about a character that doesn't come up very often. In fact, I found him nowhere else, and even on Ducas only 3 times. His name is Michael Roberts. His stories, they're very much localised to the Midlands of Ireland, especially around the area where the counties of Carlow, Laois and Kildare meet. Now, he wasn't a great warrior or a noble ruler or anything like that. He was, in fact, a necromancer. He's described as a necromancer, even though none of his stories actually involve the dead in any way. But I still like to picture him, riding across the night sky, sitting astride the reanimated corpse of Oliver Cromwell, using the rope from his posthumous hanging to steer the ghastly undead creature. Now, Michael Roberts, he wasn't a man of any great means or any great influence. In fact, he didn't have much money to his name at all. But he was a very clever man, a very tricky man. And one day he heard that there was a very good price going for pigs in the town market at a time. And so he thinks to himself, now that's a very good idea. I can head along to the market, I can sell some pigs, and I can have myself a lovely day. I can get some nice oat cakes, get some lovely sausages, and I really need a new pair of boots. So he decides to set off down the road, down to Athy, to sell some pigs at the market. Now there was one flaw with this plan. Michael Roberts did not own any pigs. But he was heading down the road anyway, heading straight towards Athy, and he comes upon 2 white boulders. So he slaps them both across the rump with his walking stick. He says, "Get up there now, get up!" And the 2 boulders, each one sprouts 4 little protrusions from the bottom. And from the front of each one pushes out a snout, followed by jaws, followed by eyes, followed by ears. And a little tail curls out at the back of each one. So he's turned these 2 boulders into 2 very fine, handsome, fat pigs, and he drives them down the road to the market in Athy. Now, as I said, these were very fine, handsome, very fat, plump pigs. Anyone would have thought they were a great prize. So it didn't take him long to find a buyer. And he helps this farmer drive the 2 big pigs into the back of his wagon, and he takes his money. And he watches the farmer and his wagon, keeping his eyes fixed on those 2 pigs as he rides down the road through the twists and turns until he disappeared over the horizon. And then Michael Roberts, he turned around and went into the market. He bought himself some nice oat cakes with honey. He bought some lovely sausages. And he bought himself a gorgeous pair of new leather boots. And he was just sitting down on a doorstep, putting on his new leather boots, when who should arrive but the farmer. "You need to give me back my money this instant. Those 2 pigs you sold me, they turned into boulders. I was wondering why they were so quiet in the back of the cart, and I turned around and they were just rats." Because as it happens, when those 2 pigs had left Michael's sight, the spell broke. That's why he'd been watching them for so long. And Michael Roberts, he thought about this. He stood up, he straightened himself out, he took a deep breath, clapped his hands together, and he turned and ran as fast as he could. He ran through the town, twisting and turning down the streets, and saw someone's door open. So he darted inside, ran up the stairs, and hid under a bed. But the farmer saw where he'd gone. So he went into the house and he looked under the tables, in the wardrobes and cupboards. Finally, he went upstairs and saw Michael's new boots poking out from under the bed. And so he grabs Michael by the ankles and starts dragging him out. And Michael, he's grabbing onto the under the side of the bed, screaming, "Let me go, let me go!" But then he starts laughing. He starts laughing, and the farmer gives one almighty tug on Michael's legs, which came off in his hands. And he fell back on the ground. And looking at what he was holding, these disembodied legs, and he fainted. So Michael, still laughing, crawls out from under the bed with his hands, pops his legs back on as casually as you'd put on your shoe, and he left an oat cake on the farmer's chest. And he left. And by the time the farmer woke up, Michael Roberts was long gone.
Congratulations! And the farmer now has 2 lovely boulders in the garden. And we now have 8 people watching.
Oh, wonderful.
I don't know who they are. If you want to say something into the comments or chat, who are you? Where are you watching from? Would you buy a pig from Michael Roberts?
Love the bit about the legs, just popping them back on, casual as you like.
As you do.
Not a bother to him.
I do wonder if maybe the person he's practiced necromancy on is himself.
Maybe.
That is what I was drawing from it.
Self-necromancy.
Like underneath his clothes, he's just like a stitched up Frankenstein's monster.
Yeah.
Big Sally from The Nightmare Before Christmas, she jumps out the window
Yeah.
and sews herself back together.
We have a Neve who comments, Michael Cheeky Bollocks. I believe that is a fair assumption. Right. Sionnán, you have a rather unusual story for us.
Yes, so this is one of the Grimm's fairy tales, and it's one of the weirder ones, which, that says a lot about Grimm's fairy tales. This one is particularly strange. It's called The Mouse, the Bird, and the Sausage. So there was once a mouse, a bird, and a sausage who decided to keep house together. And, they lived quite well, they increased their possessions immensely, and, well, they got on like a house on fire. Definitely not foreshadowing. Now, they each had their own roles in the home. The mouse would go fetch the water, she would build up the fire in the home, and she would lay the table for dinner. The bird would go to the forest and gather wood every day. And the sausage, well, of course, What else would a sausage do? He cooked the dinner. Now one day, when the bird was out gathering wood, he happened to come across another bird, and they got to talking. And the bird told this other new bird, well, all about the great time he had at home and the wonderful housemaids. And the other bird said to him, "You having me on? They are absolutely taking the piss with you. You're like a slave to them. Sure, they're at home all day, sitting in the cosy warmth beside the fire. All the mouse has to do is, well, light the fire and then sits in its bed all day. The sausage doesn't even have to get out of bed until dinner." Now the bird thought, he thought, and he went home in a foul mood. He cried out to the mouse and the sausage, "This will not stand! Up with this I will not put! We have to change around sometime, just so we all share the tasks equally." Now the mouse and the sausage weren't too happy about this, and they pleaded with the bird that no, this wouldn't work. They weren't able to do the things that the others were doing. But the bird would have its way. So they drew lots to see who would do what. Now the sausage was sent out to collect the wood, the mouse would cook, and the bird would fetch the water. So the next morning up the sausage gets out of bed and he goes out to the forest. He's gone an awfully long time. And the mouse, well, she gets ready to cook, but there's no wood for the fire, no way for her to cook it, so she just has the ingredients there in front of her. Now the bird fetches the water, no bother to him. And they wait, and they start to get a little bit worried. So out the bird goes looking for the sausage, and he comes across a dog. Now the dog has eaten the sausage whole. And the bird, of course, he faced robbery. But of course the dog, he has his excuse. Says that the sausage was caught with forged letters, and so his life was forfeit to him according to the law, and while the bird could say nothing against that. So sadly he gathered up the wood and he went home to the mouse, and well, they were tormented with the grief, but they decided to make the best of it and stay together anyway. So, well, they lit the fire and the mouse started to cook. And then she tried to do the thing that the sausage would do every day as he cooked their meal. You see, the sausage would climb into the cauldron and roll himself around to season their food. The mouse peered off into the cauldron and she looked at the bubbling and said, "Well, if the sausage did it, so can I." So into the cauldron the mouse jumps, but she tries rolling around. She's not giving flavour to the cauldron, oh no. Her fur falls off, and her skin falls off, and finally she shuffles off her mortal coil. Now the bird is sitting at the dinner table, waiting for his dinner. He's thinking, this is taking an awfully long time. So into the kitchen he goes, and he calls out for the mouse! Mouse, where are you? But there's no sign of her. He throws things all over the kitchen. He's looking in the cauldron, no sign of the mouse. He looks into the firewood, no sign, and he throws the firewood all across the room. And then something smells strange. He looks around. He hasn't been too careful where he's throwing the firewood, because he picked it up from the fire. And the whole house was ablaze. Now the bird, he flapped his wings, but that only seemed to make the fire grow more and more. So out he shot from the house to the well. Took a bucket, he lowered it down, but the bucket fell all the way down, and the bird, well, he fell with the bucket. And he drowned. That's the end of the story.
Typical Grimm's fairy tale. Everybody dies.
Yeah.
started on the Brothers Grimm.
Oh no, let's get him started. Let's get them started on the Brothers Grimm. Let's get Stephen started.
Okay, alright, okay. They didn't do proper collection. What they did, they didn't have good collection methods. What they would do was that they would get nursemaids from the, like, noble families to come visit them in their home and tell them the stories that they tell the young debutantes and stuff before they were... They weren't going out and collecting, as a collector is supposed to, getting into the communities where these stories come from, integrating themselves, and learning, like, the community versions of these stories. They were going to the nobility, learning the nobility versions, and then sanitizing them, and making them more acceptable for society. And as for Jakob's research methods, I'm not even going to start on that one. That's a whole other...
I know one of their main sources for this, they're trying to create this romantic German mystical past. She was French. Her family were French Huguenots who'd come over. So all these German fairy tales were French.
But on the converse to that, go on.
Go ahead.
Just that, I think it was for the second edition of the book that they went through it, purging all this French references that they put in.
All these
Quite
baguettes.
that, yeah, they may have gotten it from some French Huguenot sources, but also that's how stories spread. They bleed into a community.
Yeah.
You can't just agitate them out.
Yeah.
And also, like, the later the editions get, the more Christian stories get.
Yeah.
So, like, a lot of them, you'll get to the ending, and it's like, but then the prince accepted God into his life and was greeted at the gates of heaven.
Yeah.
And the kingdom
That's all you
was
need to do.
saved by God.
And you can tell how much of an influence they were on Yates.
Don't get us started.
There is a line from
By the way-
Neve. Read the last story. I'm trying to think of a joke about lines of democratization here, but it's not really my area.
I know there was a report earlier that there was some hissing on the stream. Is that cleared up at all? Or?
I think that is actually my laptop, its fan whirring away, because my laptop does have a tendency to overheat.
Right, so basically when we're not talking, we should probably mute our mics.
I tried that, but I think I might accidentally end up muting whoever else is speaking.
Okay.
Just because I thought I'd fixed that problem, but it appears I haven't.
Okay.
Technology.
Sorry about that. We
Yeah.
Say, with that story I told, I loved the bit about the forged letters.
Yeah.
Like, no, his life is forfeit because he had forged letters, and it comes out of nowhere. It's like, right, okay, that makes sense.
Where did the
But
sausage?
Sausage have forged letters.
It's a spy.
The sausage is a spy. I think there was something about, like at the fall of the Roman Empire, some of the Germans smuggling, or the Germanic-ish tribes, smuggling sausages into Rome. I'm vaguely remembering a horrible history sketch.
That sounds absolutely like something the Romans would make necessary.
Yeah.
Nisha, will you take it away?
Right. So I haven't been doing my usual storytelling for. Well, I've been doing it here, but I haven't been talking about fairies very much. So I want to do like a proper fairy story from Irish folklore. Because as we all know, the fairies are all over the place in Ireland, and they seem to have a weird symbiotic relationship with the people. Sometimes it's stealing our children, sometimes it's taking a bit of grain and milk at harvest time or when you're milking your cattle. But they just really take what they want from us whenever they want. And sometimes they'll even sneak into your kitchen in the middle of the night and throw a fucking rave. That's right. After stealing the food off your table, killing your cattle, stealing away your sweet baby boy and replacing him with a degenerate fairy senior citizen who doesn't understand consent and following Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs naming conventions would probably be called molesting, they'll throw a bloody party in your gaff. And you best not think you're invited. No, you're not on the guest list. The only member of your household that would be tolerated at the fairies' party would be the family's cat. Because cats know. They can watch and watch and they know. There's one couple that was really plagued by this. Night after night, they'd be awoken to the sound of revelry going on downstairs, music, the thumping sound of dancing. Beckon fairies, the husband would say. Beckon fairies, the wife would agree. And so one night, when the fairies kicked off, well, the husband just shot up on bed and said, "That's it, I've had it up to here of these feckin' fairies coming in here without so much as a by your leave and dancing on the table, scuffing the good delf. I'm going down there." Now she leapt at him and tried to pull him back, saying, "No, you'll just anger them." But he was having none of it. "Unhat me, woman," he said. "I will arise now and go to the kitchen, and I will fight some fairies there." Stunned by his butchery yates, she let him go. He put on his dressing gown. He tied up the belt in what he hoped was a no-nonsense knot, put on his business slippers, and went down to the kitchen. Now the sounds of the party grew louder and louder as he creaked down the stairs, and his heart was beating with thump with rhythm. When he reached the door, he heard the sound of a crashing plate. Letting go of his fear for fear of his crushed delf, he burst through the door, and that's where he saw it. His favourite plate signed by David Hasselhoff in ruins on the ground. The cat by the hearth, watching and knowing, and then. I guess you could say they were beautiful, but only in the way that the statue was beautiful, cold and austere, and at the moment, livid. One of the creatures stepped forward. "Why have you disrupted our revels?" it asked. Now, the husband had prepared a long speech about two honest people just wanting a decent bit of REM sleep was not too much to ask. But when he opened his mouth, it just flapped open and closed like a trout. Before eventually, he just whispered, "We were asleep." There was a long pause. "I see," said one of the creatures. "Our apologies." It then stared at the man. "Anything else?" it asked. "No, only if you wouldn't mind, and sorry for asking, but could you maybe keep it down, sir?" The thing smiled or smirked. "Of course. But, you should go now." He then became aware that all the room was just eyes staring at him. He gave a little bow, backed out of the room, and went back upstairs. "How'd it go?" his wife asked him. "It's taken care of," he said, getting back into the bed. "Are you sure?" "I'm sure. But it wasn't." There was sweet silence for about a week, and then the partying started up again. He jolted up in bed, and the wife moaned. "Oh, I thought you'd taken care of this." "I thought it was taken care of," he grumbled. He got up, fetched his business slippers, tied a "I thought this was settled" knot into his dressing gown, and headed downstairs. When he opened the door this time, they welcomed him warmly. "Ah, come in! Welcome, join us." "Can we help you?" said the man he'd spoken to before. "Yes," said the husband. "I thought we'd agreed you'd keep it down." The thing smiled, or smirked. "But we have kept it down. Not one of us has stepped 1 foot upon your stairs, nor taken 1 foot above the ground, so we have kept quite literally down." "That's not what I meant," he said. "Well, that is not for us to decide. We must have our revels. We must have music for our revels, and music is loud." "Must you really have your revels?" "We must," said the king. He once again noticed that the kitchen had gone silent and everyone was staring at him, so he backed away and went back upstairs. But now he had had enough. So, the next morning, he decided he'd go and consult the person you always go to when something like this comes up in Ireland, the local guru, your therapist, your exorciser of the supernatural, your definitely falsely accused local priest. Now, Father McNulty was one of those fire and brimstone, burningly devout types that Usually best to avoid mentioning the likes of fairies in Sin 2, unless you want a 5-hour lecture about the torments of hell with horrifically graphic diagrams and puppetry reenactments. But the risk was worth it this time. He sat through a comparatively short 2-hour lecture with only one graph and 3 traumatizing sock puppet displays. But after Father McNulty accompanied home, they blessed everything in the house, drenched everything with holy water, and for a few weeks it seemed to work. But then one night, there was a crash from the kitchen again, and the party started up like nothing before. Then it stopped. There was silence for a while, and then the husband and wife heard scratching at the door and the windows, and whispering voices, muttering angry words at them. The floors began to rattle, their bed began to shake. They were kept up all night, until the next morning, when the sun rose, they dared to go back downstairs, and the kitchen was a mess. All of the signed Hasselhoff plates were broken all over the floor. Everything was upended. They were in ruins. So they waited till the next night, and then the husband went off to the local therapy fort. He wanted to make a deal. Finally, he arrived at the fairy's house, and they saw him. "Ah, come in," they said. "We'll be over at yours for the party later." "Actually, it's about that," he said. "Do you think you could stop partying in my kitchen?" Fairy smiled. "Of course. But if you want something, we must get something in return. What do you offer?" Now, the husband and wife were getting on in years. They weren't young. And he knew what the fairies always wanted more than anything. "You stop partying in our kitchen," he said. "I'll give you our firstborn son." Well, obviously the fairies accepted the deal, and the husband thought he'd gotten the better of them. As I said, they were getting on in years. He didn't think that there would be any children. But one came. A few weeks in, he noticed that his wife's belly was starting to swell with a child. After she gave birth, well, he took all the precautions he could. He threw his coat over the cradle, he put the iron tongs on top, and for a while that seemed to work. But then one night, while they were in bed, they heard a sound in the kitchen. The man grabbed his iron knife and ran downstairs. There was scratching at the window, and he could hear the baby crying. He went down looking around for the fairies while his wife went off to comfort their baby. They found nothing. Eventually the scratching stopped, and he went back up to his wife. "It's all right," she said. "I have him. He was just scared, but he's fine now, just hungry." The man looked up and drew the knife. "No," he said. "No." Well, she didn't understand, but then she looked down. The thing greedily suckling on her breast was not her little boy. It was a horrible, shriveled old man. It looked up at her with only 2 teeth in its gummy mouth and started to cackle. Needless to say, she screamed. And that's the end of that one.
Well, congratulations, Naoise. You've set up a large conversation about what are business slippers. Yeah, Alice has joined us. Hello, Alice.
Hey, Alice.
Hey,
Hello.
And
That family. Sorry.
this is actually the time that we are going to have a quick tea break. So we'll be gone for about 5 minutes, and then we'll be back with more stories. So get yourself tea, coffee, other beverages are available.
Have a pee.
Yeah, do what you need to do, and then we'll be back. Sorry, I had my my thing on mute. That would be why. We now return to our regular scheduled broadcast. Or something similar to that.
Seems to have become somehow spookier in the interim.
Yes, I turned off the light that was giving me red demon eyes, and now I have glowy demon skin instead. Do you know, I can live with glowy demon skin.
Yeah, glowy demon skin is good.
But the eyes you draw the line at.
Yes.
Eyes are the window to the soul. Beauty is only skin deep.
I don't know what's in my soul.
These must be avoided like the plague.
Remember to never split infinitives.
I don't know what's going on anymore. I hope everyone is fed, watered, whatever you need. I've got a cup on tea. One of the few things I can still remember in Irish. Oh, I should close that.
Better than me.
Also, I remember Durus is door. Modra is dog. That's important.
Very important.
And that's about it. Yeah, that's about the extent of my Irish.
What about leopard?
Cachwill on Uachtarn.
I don't know what that means.
Everyone is the 8th Irish.
Yes.
That was. Where is the Irish president?
Yes.
I was very sad to hear about his dog.
Yeah.
What?
Or Sionnán.
Yeah.
What happened?
Sionnán died.
One of the first dogs.
Are we having a day of mourning for the first dog?
Well, the death of the dog also coincided with the death of notorious RBJ, Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So it's not. I'm not sure what the flag was at half-mast for.
Definitely the dog.
I think we know.
It can be both.
It can be both.
Then you need 2 flags. Is that a...
I think Ruth Bader.
No, I was just wondering if there's multiple deaths, do they have to have multiple flags?
I think when one of the deaths is a very good dog like Sionnán, they know that the dog would be happy to share.
Yeah,
Okay.
they're a good dog. But on the subject of good dogs, I've got a story for you. And unfortunately, I've gone into spooky lighting when it's not really a spooky story. So I feel that I'm ruining a dramatic moment.
Does the dog die in this story?
No, I will never tell a story where the dog dies. I don't like dog dying. That's my hard rule. It's a hard no from me. Where was I? Yes, I was telling a story. I can do stories. I do words. Once upon a time, there was a king. And like many kings, he had a wife who was a queen. And the couple had lived very happily, but there was one blight on their life. There had been 11 pregnancies, 11 births, but there were no children. You see, every time a child was born, when it was laid in the cradle, in the dead of night, something would come and something would steal away the child. There had been 8 little boys, 3 little girls, and now the queen was again pregnant. And the couple were worried that the pattern would again repeat. The courtiers, trying to take their monarch's minds off this, proposed a hunt. There had been sightings in the wood near the castle of a wolf, of a giant grey wolf, larger than any wolf that had been seen before. But the king wasn't sure he believed it because, well, there had been no reports of animals being slaughtered. What was this wolf meant to be eating? Nuts? But he agreed to the hunt. He took his hounds, he took his horse, he took his men with horns, and they rode out into the wood. It didn't take long for the hounds to catch the scent of the wolf. They began to bark, and the king followed them. The hounds had managed to corner the wolf, and he watched in amazement as the wolf turned and climbed up a tree. No wolf the king had ever come across had been able to climb trees. The dogs were at the foot of the tree barking up. They were certain they were barking up the right tree. And the wolf looked down at the king with the most pleading expression in its eyes that the king could almost swear it looked human. And then the wolf, with one look of desperation, leapt from the branch in the tree and landed on the king's saddle. The attendants were about to draw their knives, but the wolf seemed to be grovelling before the king, holding out his paws, begging for his life. And the king was so moved by this remarkable wolf, who could climb trees, that he decided he would spare the creature's life. He would bring it back to the castle. Perhaps this beast had been trained by someone to do tricks. Perhaps it could entertain the queen. And so the wolf was removed from the king's horse. But when the men went to tie it up with ropes, the wolf managed to dodge and duck every knot they tried to tie, until at last the king said, "Well, he doesn't want to lead. Let's see if he walks beside me." And the king was amazed that the wolf did. He trotted next to him, head held high, tail wagging nobly. And when they reached the castle, the king brought the wolf to the queen. The ladies in waiting screamed at the sight of this enormous wolf entering, and the wolf walked straight up to the pregnant queen and lay down at her feet, as if wanting to protect her. The queen nervously stretched out one hand and began to stroke the wolf's fur, surprised at how soft and thick it was. And from that day, wherever the queen went, the wolf followed, always looking out, always on guard, always ready to protect. At last the time came when the queen was ready to give birth. The king was on the outside of the birthing chamber, but the wolf could not be removed from the queen's side. He paced up and down next to the bed, and when the little child was born and laid in the queen's arms, the wolf came up and placed his muzzle next to it, and the little babe reached out a tiny hand and wrapped its fingers around the wolf's paw. And anyone who has seen the grip of a babe knows how strong it is. But a stronger bond seemed to have formed between the child and the wolf. For the child could not be taken from the wolf. No matter where he was, the wolf would follow. And that night, when the babe was laid in the cradle, the wolf lay down beneath, watching and waiting. The king and queen went to bed thinking, perhaps this wolf had been sent to them as a miracle. Perhaps their 12th child would not be stolen. In the dead of night, a strange silence fell over the castle. All there, though they tried to keep awake, were lulled into slumber. But this silence was suddenly broken by a crash. The king and queen leapt from their beds and ran to the chamber where their baby was. They arrived just in time to see a horrid hand reaching through the window to grasp at the babe. But the wolf had leapt and was holding it by the wrist, and with one snap of his head, the hand was severed from the arm and dropped down. The queen rushed over. Her child, but he was perfectly safe. The king congratulated the wolf on having saved their babe, and the wolf went back under the crib and slept for the rest of the night. And he was that prince's protector. When the baby was learning to crawl, the great wolf was behind him, padding along, making sure he didn't get into trouble. The young prince learnt to walk, pulling himself up on the wolf's fur. And when he had got the hang of walking, the poor wolf never got a moment's rest, because he was forever chasing after the young prince, grabbing him by the scruff of his shirt to stop him falling into whatever well, ditch, puddle, or other trouble he had found himself in. In fact, the wolf was getting no sleep at all, and so the king had the idea of making a harness. He had a chain of gold made, one end attached to the wolf, the other end to the little prince. This meant that on sunny days, when the prince was toddling around the garden, the wolf could lie peacefully in the shade of a tree, and if his eyes happened to close for just a second, it was fine. he would feel if the prince was wandering too far. But young children are good at finding ways. And the little prince, though he couldn't quite work out how to tie his shoelaces or do up his buttons, managed to work out how the clasps of the harness were attached. And one day, when his canine nursemaid was dozing, he slipped the noose, not the noose, no children in nooses, he slipped the harness and wandered off. The king came down into the garden with the queen, and they saw the wolf in the shade of the tree, but they didn't see the child. They went over to the wolf and shook him awake, asking, "Wolf, where is our son? Where is the prince?" The wolf looked around, picked up the chain in his mouth and pulled, and pulled, and pulled, and pulled until it came to the end. The queen let out a terrible wail. Her 12th child had gone the way of all other 11. She could not escape this curse. But the wolf would not stay to hear her howling, for he set off on the scent. He tracked the smell of the prince, and he tracked it far and he tracked it wide. The wolf walked for 7 days and 7 nights, following the scent of the prince, until he came to a house. A strange house that was bigger on the inside than the outside. A house that had only 3 windows, but had 12 views. The wolf went up and began to scratch at the door. An old woman opened it, and when she saw the wolf, threw a stick at him. But the wolf caught a glimpse on the inside of the young prince. He ran back as fast as his paws would carry him to the castle. He ran to find the king. The king, though, would not admit him. "You have failed me, wolf. You were to protect my son, and he has been stolen." So the wolf ran to the queen. The wolf begged and pleaded at the queen's feet, whining and whimpering, and at last the queen seemed to realise he was trying to tell her something. She grabbed her husband, who was still complaining about how the wolf had failed them, and they followed the wolf. They followed him far and wide, and the wolf led him to the house with the 3 windows and the 12 views. The king knocked on the door, and it was opened by an old woman. When she saw the king and the queen, she was all sweetness and politeness and hospitality, ushering them in. Oh, what a pleasure to have the king and queen at her doorstep. The king and queen entered and looked around. There was no sign of any children. The wolf followed them and began to pace about the room. The old woman was eyeing the wolf nervously. He doesn't bite, does he?" The king shook his head. "No, he's never bitten it." "Well, actually, he did bite one person. But that was a long time ago." Conversation started between the king, queen, and the old woman. And the old woman said that she was preparing food for her son. He'd be home any minute. The king and queen heard a noise at the door, and in walked a man. A man with one stump for a hand. The wolf, when he saw this man, began to growl, and it was all the king could do to hold him back from leaping upon this man. In fact, the wolf managed to loose from his grip, pounced on the man, pushing him to the ground, snarling at him. The king and queen were able to put 2 and 2 together and declared that this man had stolen their child. The old woman fell on her knees and said, "Please, please, spare my son's life, and I will tell you where your children are. Promise me that you will not harm me or my son, and I will give you not only your little boy, but your 8 other sons and your 3 other daughters." The king and the queen thought this was an excellent bargain. 1 life for 12. The old woman went to a chest, opened it, and out came a young girl aged about 12. Then 2 twin boys aged 11. Then another girl, then another boy, then another girl, and until there were 12 children standing there, each going down in age, and the youngest, the little prince who had so recently gone missing. And when the prince saw his parents and saw the wolf, he cried out, "Shaggy Papa!" And he ran straight not to his parents but to the wolf, because this child knew his priorities. The child threw his arms around the neck of the wolf and said, "Oh, I've missed you so much." And his parents were a little bit, they would have liked if he hugged them, but they understood. The bond between a boy and his wolf is very strong. They were about to turn and returned to the castle with their 12 children. But the old woman said, "Wait! If you promise never to come here again, I will tell you how to remove the spell on your friend there." The king looked around, not sure who she was talking about. Was one of his children under a spell? The old woman was pointing at the wolf. "You don't think that is any ordinary wolf, do you? That is a man who has been living as a wolf for many years. If you take a hazel rod and strike him on the head 3 times, he shall resume his true form." And so, when they were back at the castle, the queen went into the garden, took a hazel stick from a tree, tapped the wolf on the head 3 times, and there before her was a man. And just as the wolf had helped the little prince to learn to walk, the little prince helped the man remember how to walk on 2 legs and how to eat with his hands instead of just sticking his face straight into the bowl. And the little boy didn't call him Shaggy Papa, as he had always called his wolf friend before. He called him Godfather. But secretly, he always thought of him as his wolf friend. And that's the story.
That's lovely.
Always trust the wolves.
Yes. They're
I think
so
they're real
soft.
kids.
Have you petted a wolf?
Yes.
Wow, I'm jealous.
Of course Stephen's petted a wolf.
When was this?
Look at them.
Tell us the story.
I was at a wolf sanctuary in the UK a few years ago, and they brought the 2 of the wolves out to, say hello. They were on chains, but basically we were supposed to not approach them. We were supposed to let them approach us, and then
Of course.
interact as they seemed comfortable. We were told not to only rub them, not to pet them, because they can't distinguish between that and hitting them.
Oh.
So, yeah, one of them kept coming up to me. So I crouched down and she started licking my face. And one thing I can say is that wolves, you know that thing you do with dogs sometimes where you get them on either side of the head and go like that?
Yeah.
Wolves love it.
Aww.
Yeah, they're very, very soft.
There was talk of them setting up a wolf sanctuary in Donegal. Does anyone know if they did that before the world started to end?
And I think they're going to reintroduce wolves
Oh.
in Donegal.
There has
Which I
been
would love to see.
There is there's like an island sanctuary where they have a kind of park, wildlife reserve, park zoo thing where they've got bears and wolves and stuff. I can't remember what county it's in. But
Is it
it's not
Fota?
like properly reintroducing them to the wild because they're on an island.
Yeah.
I'd love some
I've seen
wolves.
some people suggest that introducing lynxes first would be better,
Would it?
just as a proof of concept.
Why?
Well,
That's
because
like
they
to
use,
go after sheep, I think.
yeah, they have smaller territories. They were also once indigenous to Ireland. So just to show that it would work.
I was thinking
What have
though,
you got
with
against
the
lynxes,
other
Sionnán?
11 children
Yep.
there. Like, this might be just because I've recently watched Room. But where were they? What was going on? And are they okay?
They're reasonably okay. I mean, they were living in a sort of Time Lord box.
I'm thinking, have they seen the sunlight ever? Like, that's a whole other avenue to go down.
I don't know. I mean, the story, I got it out of, it's like a story within a story within a story.
Okay.
They don't go into what happens to the other children, though. But the man was turned into a wolf because he could understand what birds said, and his wife was fed up because the birds kept telling him jokes and he kept laughing at them, and she thought he was laughing at her. So she just got so fed up that she turned him into a wolf.
Perfectly reasonable reaction.
Yep.
That's
Yeah.
amazing.
Alright. Story.
Yes. seeing as you brought up stories about wolves biting off people's hands, I kind of feel like maybe the binding of Fenris might be a good story.
Yeah, I love that story.
Do we need to give a warning to Kira, because she threatened me if the wolf in my story died?
Oh, well, no, I'm not going to do the entire story of Fenris Wolf, because then I have to go into Ragnarok.
You could go from the Loki's 3 children.
Yeah, I think I'm going to start with Loki.
Okay.
Okay, so Loki, most people would know he was the Norse god of mischief. Not, in fact, the brother of Thor. He was the half-brother of Odin. And they both liked challenging each other and subjecting each other to new ideas of not just knowledge, but also a little bit of mischief. Odin tended to be a little bit of a trickster himself. But Loki, to say that he didn't really respect the gender binary would be an understatement. He didn't so much smash the binary as he did burn it down and shit in the ruins. Now, Loki had several children. He was father to some, mother to others, and a deadbeat to all of them. One of these was the great world serpent, Jormungandr. A huge, huge serpent wrapped the entire way around the earth, with his tail in his mouth, and if ever he lets go, the world will end. Another one was the 8-legged horse, Sleipnir, which soon became the steed of his half-uncle, which is a little weird, but anyway. Another was Hel, who was half skeleton and became the queen of the underworld. And finally, there was Fenris. Fenris Wolf. Fenris was a gargantuan wolf, stronger than mountains, stronger than fire, stronger than the sun or moon. And it was foretold at Fenris's birth that Fenris would kill the gods at Ragnarok. And so, the Aesir and the Vanir, they decided Fenris could not be allowed to go free. Fenris needed to be restrained somehow. So they went to the dwarves. And they asked the dwarves to forge a chain that could not be broken. So the dwarves, they got to work. They forged a chain, each link of which was made out of a different impossible thing. There were 7 impossible things in total. So 7 links to the chain. But, thinking back on it from a modern perspective, many of these things weren't actually impossible. There were items like the spit of a bird. We now know that birds do have spit. In fact, there are some birds that make their entire nests out of spit. And those nests are delicacies for some reason. Another one of these impossible things was the beard of a woman. And considering that this culture had Loki as one of their primary cultural figures, you'd think they'd know that the beard of a woman was not an impossible thing. But anyway, I digress. So the dwarves, they forged this unbreakable chain. And while they're forging the links, it looks like a chain, but when they're done, it suddenly transforms into a fine red ribbon. And that's only the first problem. You see, the second problem is Fenris Wolf was so strong, so powerful. How could anyone possibly bind Fenris if Fenris didn't allow them to, no matter how strong the chain was? And Fenris spoke to them, because of course, Loki's child, of course it can speak. Loki's children don't make any sense. So Fenris said, "If one of you will put your hand in my mouth, you can attach that chain to me, but If you tie it to anything else, I will bite that hand off. Now, each of the Aesir, each of the Vanir, they knew Fenris needed to be bound. They knew Fenris needed to be tied to something, or the binding would be useless. But not one of them wanted to risk their hand. None but Tyr. Tyr, who was the god of justice, the god of truth. He agreed. He placed his hand in Fenris's mouth. And they bound Fenris with the chain, but they also bound Fenris to a mountain. And when Fenris saw what had happened, he bit off Tyr's hand. And Tyr, of course, being the god of justice and truth, allowed this. He did not struggle. He did not protest. And thus Tyr lost his hand. And Fenris was bound till Ragnarok finally came. And that's my story.
Wow.
I love that story. It's so sad though.
I love the Neil Gaiman version where it's like they were really good friends up until this point.
It's one of the things I've always liked about. Go on.
Oh, also, like, Fenris wasn't essentially bad as well. Like, they chained him up for something that he would do in the future, but there was no bad in him until they did that.
Yeah.
So, by the very action of chaining him up, they kind of sealed themselves into Ragnarok anyway.
Self-fulfilling
Like a self-fulfilling
prophecies.
thing.
It's one of the I love about the Norse myths is that there's this strong sense of fate and things have to happen, but also wrapped up with the self-fulfilling prophecy. They're told that Fenris is going to kill Odin, so they have to stop Fenris. But by the act of stopping Fenris, they ensure that Fenris, when he gets free, will
We'll kill it.
Odin.
Yeah.
Same with Loki. You bind Loki.
Yeah. Actually,
Stephen is muted.
oh,
And he was they were trying to say something.
No, I wasn't saying anything.
Oh, okay, sorry. I saw your mouth moving.
one thing though, that on the impossible thing being the beard of a woman, and how that's clearly not impossible, because Loki, but also there's a line in Shakespeare in Twelfth Night where someone, I think it's in Twelfth Night, where someone insults Viola, who is pretending to be a young page, saying to her basically, get out of here, you young lad, come back to me when you've got a beard on your chin, then you can talk. And she turns to him and says, I have a beard, it's just my curse that it's not on my face.
It's the same hair.
I know, but that has just stuck with me since I saw it in one of the film versions. I think I was about 10.
Is that
And like I want to use that line at some stage in an argument.
Yeah. It also reminds me of the Medusa question.
Does she have tiny
Is it
snake
all her hair?
eyelashes?
Wait, what's the Medusa question?
Her.
Is all of her hair?
is all
Yeah.
her hair a snake?
Oh god.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, that reminds me of something from my story later on, but that's for future.
I think we're gonna take just another quick tea break. And then we'll be back. So, because I know that Nisha and Stephen have some scandalous stories.
I have a very interesting one about a goat
Oh,
as well.
so we will come back with a goat. Clicking buttons, clicking buttons. We now return to our
Hello again.
whatever we are. Hope everyone's got their tea. I see you've got a mug of something there, Nisha. What's your beverage of choice this evening?
Tea.
Tea.
Very boring.
I've got tea too. Only mine is spooktacular tea.
Oh wow.
I believe we were promised goats.
Right.
Yes.
So this story, it's not really a story so much as a song. Kind of a ballad. But not really a ballad so much as a drinking song. And not really a drinking song so much as a fighting song. And the song itself, well, it'll be familiar to some and not so familiar to others. And the chorus goes, Allaloo, willaloo, allaloo, unpucker boila. Right? This story doesn't start with a puck, a goat. It starts with a man walking down the road. He's got a pike in his hand and he's ready to go look for some work in Dromore because he's heard there's a bit of work going there. And you know, times are hard. You pick up what you can. He's walking along this road and he sees a pair of eyes. These eyes are staring at him through a fence with pure, unadulterated hatred. He sees these eyes and he stands very, very still. The eyes, they seem to look into his very soul. They bore into him. And then, looking over the fence, he sees, attached to the eyes is a pair of horns, and attached to the horns is a big black coat, and attached to that are two pairs of hooves. And altogether, it makes for a very livid goat. And the man quickly breaks the gaze of the goat and he runs as fast as he can, but the goat, he runs after him with a fury so focused that he cannot lose the goat no matter what he does. He runs over hills, he runs over ditches, but the goat is fast after him. And then he jumps over a bush and the goat gets stuck in the bush by his horns. And the goat tries to pull himself out, but he can't. And he tries to go further through the bush, but he can't. The man looks behind and he sees the poor wee goat. And he thinks, sure, he'll be stuck like that and the wolves will come along and get him and he'll eat him up. I just can't do it. So the man, he turns back over the hedge and he sees the poor wee goat's tail. He tries to pull him out by the tail, but he can't. And he hooks his body, tries to pull him out like that, but he can't. And then, in a last-ditch attempt, he straddles the goat over the back, holds the horns, and pulls with all his might. But this was exactly what the goat was waiting for. The goat cackles as only a goat can, and jumps over the bush. And he keeps going, and the man's clinging onto the horns for dear life, and people start to notice something strange. They look out of their houses miles away, and they hear the cry of the angry goat, and the cry of the man on his back. And they send word to the local sergeant. Now, the local sergeant is based in Roche's town. They say to him, look, something strange afoot. There's a goat on the loose. But it's not just any goat, it's got a man on the back. And the man is screaming and the goat is screaming and we don't know what's going on. But we think you're going to need all your best men together. And the sergeant, well, he's heard of such things before. He's heard of Lucas. He's heard of Dunn's, and he's not taking any chances. So he gathers together all of the police in Roche's town, and they form a barricade along the main road, and in the distance they see the dust and clouding up into the air as the hooves of the angry, livid goat thunder closer and closer and closer. And finally, they see the goat, and they see the man, and they hear the screams, and the goat doesn't break his pace. He keeps charging, and charges straight through the barricade, and straight through the lines of all the policemen, and right up to the sergeant. At which time, goat takes his horns, and he, well, not to put too fine a point in it, pushes him up the arse. The trousers come down, everything's on show. The goat is ripping up the trousers and the underpants of the sergeant and keeps going, and the poor man is shouting behind, I'm sorry, it's not my goat, help me, please. And he keeps going, and until they get to Dingle. Now in Dingle, there's a priest. The priest, well, he's trying to get him some sleep because, by this time, it's getting close to night. The poor man had started out the start of the day looking for work, and now the sun was setting, and he was stuck in the back of the goat. A very angry goat. For reasons we do not know. The priest would hear out of his window the unearthly cries of goat and man intermingled. It seemed to him it was the cries of the devil himself. And then suddenly, as he greeted the parishioners on their way into church, he told them the story about this unearthly sound, and that it must have been the devil crying out at night in the form of a goat, torturing poor souls. And in walks a man, bedraggled, smelling a goat hair. He can't even walk straight, and he collapses at the back of the church. Says a wee prayer to himself, thankful that he's still alive, but fearful that the goat is still out there somewhere. And that's the end of the story.
Oh.
Bestiality!
Well, that's it's sort of a take on the song Pucker Bwilla, which is an Irish language song. It's quite fun. But yeah, basically all of that happens in the song, and it's a very famous song and about an angry goat.
So you've got Moo for me, Angry Goats. You just need one about a sheep now.
I'm just building up the old bestiality back catalogue. Yeah. Although I never explicitly said him and the goat were intimately involved.
You didn't need to.
You did use the word riding.
And straddled the goat.
In fairness, my ears picked up at straddled. Now, speaking of bestiality,
Of course.
I believe I promised a rather scandalous myth. So, when looking for scandal, you don't have to look far, you just pop over to Greece. Because Zeus will always serve you up with something pleasant. Because as with most Greek mythological stories, this one kicks off with Zeus getting a bit horny for a woman. Now, the woman in question was Europa, the woman who eventually gave name to this moderately tolerable continent. And Zeus decided to approach her in the form of a bull, because he was always into a bit of pet play. So Europa saw bull Zeus approaching, and her first instinct was to flee, but then she smelt his breath, and the bull's breath was the most gorgeous rose-scented perfume she'd ever smelt in her life. So she walks over to Zeus, and Zeus scoops Europa up on his back and carries her off to Crete, where he has his way with her, hopefully while not still in bull form. Either way, Europa later gave birth to 3 sons, Minos, Sarpedon, and Rhadamanthus. Thankfully, Minos is the one we're concerned with for this story, because if you think I'm saying Rhadamanthus again, you're fucking wrong. But Europa managed to catch the eye of the king of Crete, Asteros, who married her and helped her raise her children. When King Asteros died, he had no children of his own to inherit the kingdom, and Minos decided to go for a power grab. He proclaimed that the gods had decided he should rule the kingdom of Crete, and to prove that he had their favour, he said that at the next sacrifice to Poseidon, he would pray for something, and to show that he was fit to rule, they would send him up whatever he asked for. Sure enough, at the next sacrifice, he prayed to Poseidon for a magnificent white bull to be sent from the depths so that he could sacrifice it back to Poseidon. And as with all of the Greek deities, Poseidon was waiting to hear something about being given a nice offering. Seeing it as a no-lose situation, he sent the white bull up to Crete and to Minos. Everyone decided that yes, this is the sin that Minos should rule us. He was declared king, and it came time to sacrifice the bull. The problem was, Minos liked the look of the bull. This was a magnificent beast. So he thought he'd just keep it for himself. He put the bull away in his own fields, and he sacrificed another bull instead, thinking that Poseidon wouldn't notice. And Poseidon reacted with all the good graces and emotional maturity you would expect of a Hellenic deity, in that he threw a temper tantrum and swore undying revenge against Minos. And Minos was married to a woman called Parthenope. She was the daughter of the literal sun, a beautiful, radiant woman who loved her husband dearly. She'd been at his side through thick and thin, and she'd even forgiven his occasional indiscretions. You see, it would be fair to say that Minos took after his father when it came to matters of the palace, in that if it moved, he wanted it from him. It had gotten so bad at one point that Parthenope had had enough, and she decided to put a stop to it. She put a curse on Minos, so that if he slept with anyone except her, when he reached climax, instead of usual ejaculate, an assortment of snakes, scorpions, and other poisonous creatures would spew forth. After a couple of hookups, people figured out what was going on, news spread, and Minos stayed happily in his marriage bed ever since. And that's why it was strange, because it was now Parthenope's time to stray. Ever since Minos had refused to sacrifice the white bull, Parthenope had found herself drawn to it. She would just go to the fields each day and wait watching the beast for hours, admiring its powerful muscles as they tensed and clenched under the pristine white hide as it strode up and down the field like a king surveying its kingdom. The bull filled Parthenope with desire, which in turn filled her with disgust. But eventually lust eclipsed in disgust. She sent for the inventor Daedalus and asked him to craft something that would allow her to slake her passions with the bull. Not one to ask too many questions, Daedalus constructed a hollow cow out of wood. He then mounted it on wheels, covered it in cowhide, told Parthenope to climb inside, and he wheeled it to the field where the bull was. He lay down inside, peering out the small eye holes in the front, looking for the bull. But she heard him before she saw him. He had approached her from behind, noticing the strange guest and had come over to investigate. On discovering what seemed to be a stray heifer in his field, he proceeded to follow his natural instincts and mounted Parthenope, definitely still in bull form. After that, the desire for the bull had finally vanished. Weeks passed, and she noticed that her stomach was starting to grow. She was terrified of what might be growing inside of her. She hoped it was her husband's child, but the birth was longer and more painful than any of her previous births. After pushing and heaving and sweating, something eventually emerged. She lay back exhausted as the midwives busied around, wrapping the thing up in a blanket. She heard them speaking in worried, hushed tones, and then the sound of wet skin slapping skin, and the first cries for a child. She froze. No human could make those noises. One of the women pressed the wrapped up bundle into her arms. She looked down. She looked at his tiny little feet, slightly curled as he was slowly clenching and unclenching his toes, experimentally moving his fingers for the first time. His body was small and somewhat plump around the belly, topped off with the remnants of the cord that had once tied her to him. And at his neck, the soft skin was slowly replaced by coarse black hair. His jaw protruded out into a snout. Hairy eyes stuck out from the side of her head. Underneath, two tiny stubs that were the unmistakable beginnings of horns. A wave of revulsion washed over her as her worst fears were made flesh in front of her eyes. But then she looked at the baby bull. His eyes opened. The deep crimson eyes stared up at his mother. And suddenly, the horror just melted from her. And she looked back, smiling at her son. Of course, Minos soon found out. Once he heard the full story from Parsipe, he decided to consult an oracle. Because that's a great idea. Nothing ever happens wrong when you go consult an oracle in ancient Greece. Just ask Oedipus. And the oracle told Minos that his wife had been cursed by Poseidon for failing to sacrifice the white bull as promised, and that to appease Poseidon, he must kill the bull at once. Minos didn't really argue about killing the animal that had cuckolded him, but he was unsure what to do with Parsipe's son. The oracle warned him that the creature would grow very tall and strong, and would only be sustained by eating human flesh. He had intended to kill it, but his wife had begged him to change his mind. She said that it was his arrogance, his greed, that had caused this misfortune to be placed upon them. Her child was innocent. Why should he pay for Minos' sins? Why should he be killed simply for his nature? And Minos didn't argue. He knew she was right. So he commissioned Daedalus to construct a place to keep the beast safe. A vast array of twisting and winding passages so complex that the beast could wander through it for centuries without any fear of its finding its way out. He called this building the Labyrinth, and kept the beast there for many, many years. It became known as the Minotaur, and to find out what happened to the Minotaur, well, that's a different story.
Oh, God.
Greeks.
Sorry, Emily, we've gone down this path again.
I might have suspected it. And Stephen, your mention of the comments of, oh God, the one thing Maeve didn't do that we know
If
of.
Maeve had access to Daedalus, the tone would have gone very differently.
Yeah.
She could have just directly offered the brown bull of Cooley the friendship of her thighs and cut Dara out of it altogether. No need for the middleman.
I mean, you make sense. Really. Yeah. I mean, she was very fond of offering the friendship of her thighs to everyone.
And what was
But
it?
humans. Humans.
Yeah, but if you... It always talks about how it would take either 30 men or one Fergus to keep her satisfied.
Mm-hmm.
That's just because Fergus knew where the clit was. Took the rest of them 30 tries to find it.
If we ever make merch, can we please have that mug be a thing?
I can't believe I just said that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Unlicensed oral arts. Fergus knows where the clit is.
Out of the four of us
Yeah.
who have said that,
I blame Nisha. I'm blaming Nisha for
I
the
did
effect.
nothing.
The effect your filthy stories are having on me.
You're gonna have to take it up with the ancient mythologians, because I didn't write this shit. I am merely a conveyor of truth.
I had a story in mind to tell, but I can't after that.
okay. In that case, speaking of truth, I have a story, and this one is about me because it happened to me. This happened when I was about 15 years old, so roughly 4,000 years ago, before I was left to die in the bog. So I was in second year of secondary school. I was in a theatre group. I had just been cast as Tiresias in Antigone. And suddenly my stomach starts hurting. It's very mild at first, very mild. It feels like wind. But it starts getting worse and worse. And I'm worried it's constipation, so I stop eating. But it keeps getting worse, and it still feels just like wind, but much more severe. And I start taking Rennies and antacids and other digestive things, and nothing makes any difference. So I stay home from school for a few days. And on one of those days, suddenly the pain goes from being just not wanting to get up to suddenly wanting to drive my head through a wall. And it does that in an instant. So I decide, okay, this is definitely not wind. I call my mother, who was at work at the time, and tell her I think I need to see a doctor. So she comes home. It takes her about an hour to get home. And first, she knows that there's a doctor living down the road from us. So she drives me to him first, and he has no idea what's going on. Tells us to go to our GP. Takes us about a half hour to get to him. He has no idea what's going on. So he sends us to the hospital. Takes us nearly an hour to get there. And at this stage, the pain is excruciating. I've vomited several times. I am drifting in and out of consciousness. But then, suddenly the pain starts fading. I'm drifting in and out of consciousness still, and the pain is gone. And I think to myself, oh, okay, I'm dying. The doctor comes out and takes a look at me. And he says, right, okay, here's what's happened. Your appendix has burst. We're very surprised you are not already dead. So we're going to cut that out of you immediately. So they put me on morphine. And I wake up at around 2 in the morning, completely doped up to the eyeballs. And I am desperate for a piss. So I look around me, I pull the IV out of my arm, and I go looking for a toilet. And again, I am completely doped up to my eyeballs. I'm only able to find one toilet. I go in there, and there is this absolutely terrified, extremely feeble-looking old woman just crouched on the toilet. And I just think, oh, excuse me, sorry, I'll go somewhere else. Or that's what I intended to say. It more than likely came out closer to So I go back to the ward, and I look for a bedpan. And they didn't have any of those solid plastic or metal kidney-shaped ones. They only had those foil ones that looked like a takeaway tray. So I pick up one of those, and I start peeing in that. And it's mostly blood. So I'm just standing there in the middle of the floor, pissing vital fluid into a takeaway tray. And I can tell this is filling up very quickly. This is not going to contain it all. I have too much. So I'm looking around for another one, and it has become so full that the foil is starting to flop around and spill bits. And as I'm looking for another one, it just falls out of my hands. And at that point, I'm reserved. I'm fuck it. I just stand there until I'm finished. And then I get back into bed. And the next morning, the nurse came in. The entire floor is covered in a mixture of blood and urine. She asks, what the hell happened in here? And I'm just there under the covers like this, and I say, I don't know. that is the story of my near-death experience, which is one of the funniest stories I know.
Since you're
Oh
here,
my
we know you're
God.
alive. That's hilarious.
Yeah, you said you could top Nisha and the salad dressing, but
You're gonna have to work a lot harder next time.
I know this is like a side note to it, but of all the people to cast as Tiresias,
Especially now.
yeah.
well, that's a note we could end on.
I love that story.
I fear we're lowering the tone of this monthly meeting.
I think a theme is emerging.
Accidentally.
I mean, I tried to bring a nice story in, and no.
I told a loving story about a mother battling through postpartum depression and bonding with her child. I mean, I don't get where the issue is there.
And a very small, dirty old man.
The less stupid one.
Emily, you look like you've just transcended onto another plane of embarrassment.
Yes.
This happens every time I get together with a group of storytellers.
We're filthmongers, what can we say?
We actually are. Like, it's bad.
Okay, I'm going to challenge myself to see if I can find a filthy story and turn your faces into my face for next month.
I'll send you on some of my books.
I'm going to have a look at that field of penises.
I was trying to find a good full-length version of the story, but I could only find the one on Wikipedia, which is just linking back to the park's website, and the one I posted earlier, because I don't know where. I think it is just one of those proper local legends which they never bothered to collect and write in a book.
I wonder why.
I don't know. It
Yeah.
seems like a perfectly lovely story as well.
It's a mystery.
One of those locations where nuns like to go do their squats.
Oh,
I love watching Emily's face.
Alright, so next month, the last Thursday, is the 29th of October.
Okey-dokey.
Yeah. So we'll be there. It'll be, I mean, it's close to Halloween, so it's going to have to be spooky.
Yep.
And spooky with a touch of filth. I think we can do that.
That's fine.
the more necrophilia, less bestiality.
I was going to say, something was going to tell me there's going to be a bit of necrophilia next month. I see. I
Necrophilia
have
and
a story,
bestiality, the two key ingredients in the Twilight franchise.
Oh. Did you hear your one wrote another book?
Yes.
Yeah, all from Edward's point of view.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. Just that.
I'm waiting for the one from the point of view of their bed. Their bed must have seen some things.
Broken again.
Oh God. Thank you, everyone who has joined us watching. Oh dear gods. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope there are no small children watching.
There best not be. We're past the watershed as far as I'm
Oh
concerned.
God, I don't think we ever had a watershed.
No.
Yeah, we're very much not for children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Though we are
We'll
childish.
probably start saying that a bit more.
Yeah.
What was that name you had, Nisha? Like unlicensed oral arts?
Emily. Unlicensed oral arts.
Hmm.
I've put all the branding in your hands, Nisha.
That's dangerous. We're gonna have the t-shirts and the mug with Fergus can find the clit on it soon.
Oh God.
I know an artist. I know an artist who is quite proficient at film. And
Yeah.
comical filth, especially.
Oh, it's going to be even more graphic than I thought it was. Maybe it should be an entire, like, vulva-shaped cup.
Before this gets
Where
any
do you
further,
drink from? Do you drink from the urethra or do you drink from the vagina?
I think we have to say goodnight before this just turns into pure porn. Alright.
Yes?
Goodbye.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.